In our chat right now, they're saying that you're making Southern U.S. sound like the Confederacy in the 21st century.
It technically is. Let's not play games and act like that's not what it is. It still has remnants of all of that Confederate pride. There was in Birmingham, Alabama. They just removed a Confederate statue that
Right.
loomed over a predominantly black community. Like we as black people, we see the Confederate flag all over the South. If it wasn't the Confederacy of the 21st century, we wouldn't see the flag. Like we
Yeah.
wouldn't. And when you look at a lot of the southern states and how their flags are made, a lot of them are made as remnants of the Confederate flag. A lot of the state flags are remnants of the Confederate flag. So you can't tell me the southeastern region of the United States isn't the 21st century Confederacy. It is. It is. It's just doing it. Alabama gerrymandering, the way they cut their lines in voting so that black votes don't count or they don't count as much as white votes. When we integrated black people into the white system, integration wasn't about mixing evenly. Integration was about taking blacks and putting them in the white system. And now that we have to account for your humanity in our system, we're going to create laws and legislations and rules to where you have as little power as we can give you. As little power as we want you to have is what you will have in this system. And that's what happens. And that's what thrives in the South. That is what thrives in the South. And that's why the South, like a lot of people, when you talk about being black and wanting to be in politics and you're coming, like I remember saying I wanted to be in politics here, and it was like, oh, it's a good old boy system. You know, it's not something you can just jump into. Like, you have to understand, like, this is a red state. They want this. And it's like, why? Like, why can't I just be black and want to represent people? Why can't I want to fight for equity and be here in the South? They're telling me that's not something you do in the South because the South has a certain way of going. The South has certain rules and regulations. You know, they still call it the Bible Belt. It's a Bible Belt. So it's like it is the 21st century Confederacy because the way in which people operate, and it's not all people. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm saying everybody in the South feels this way. I'm not. But when we look at the power structures in the South, it's still a Confederacy.
I do want to comment on another one of the comments that we got in our chat saying that the Confederate statues shouldn't be removed because they're a part of history. This is just something that I know to be fact. A lot of the Confederate statues that were erected were not erected directly after the Civil War. Obviously, the majority of Confederate statues actually were erected during the time that Martin Luther King Jr. walked Selma, Alabama. So the Confederate statues were very much constructed as a power structure to kind of prove that this is the Confederacy, these are the people that we consider to be our heroes. So
It's like a display of force at that point, similar with having
like
the burning crosses.
The modern day version of it is them saying like, you know, blue lives matter, all lives matter, anything to combat whenever there's a protest going on for Black Lives Matter, and essentially erecting the statues at that time was for that. So that's interesting to know. I don't think a lot of people realize
that's a very important thing to note when people kind of put the idea out that you shouldn't tear down these structures because they're part of history. Yes, they're a part of history. The history was they were erected to assert a sense of dominance over predominantly black communities and the white ones.
Yep.
But that's just a comment on that chat.
It's crazy that people always, like, whenever you have the conversation about the Confederate flag or the Confederate nation, the monuments, the statues, the names, the parts, all of that, right? When you have those conversations that people want to talk about how it's part of history, it brings to me one question. What about the rest of history that we want to sweep under the rug? The Native American history,
Yeah.
the Black history, the history of the Japanese internment camps. Why do we talk about how we ignored and we knew the Holocaust was happening, but as America, we ignored that until cameras came. Like, why don't we talk about that history? Why is it that we want to empower the history of dominance over blacks, but we never want to empower the dark history of America and how America has not been what it's telling you in the history books? We don't ever want to talk about the real history. We want to talk about the glossiness. We want to keep, again, it seems to me that it's an idea of white supremacy. You want to keep that idea in American history, but everybody else can be swept under the rug. Everything else can be broken. How long did it take for us to get MLK in the Washington Mall? Like, come on. Like, that alone was a fight. Like, that was a fight. For us to get an African American History Museum by the Smithsonian, like, why did it take so long? And it's these things where history pops up all over the place, And it's all well and good, but as long as it's not history that's going to empower somebody that's not white, that becomes the issue. Like, you want to take history, let's talk history, but let's not be blinded to any part of it. Let's talk all of it. Let's talk every single bit of history if we're going to talk history.
Of
Don't
course,
try to
it's the
just say
idea that you
it's a
gotta be
part of it.
uncomfortable to grow. Yeah. I actually have not, obviously, I did not grow up in the American education system, and I definitely don't know what it was, what the education system was like.
Me
in
and
the
Josh
South.
can probably give our view on that based on our
Yeah.
education.
But I do know one of the big arguments that I learned in college was the idea that the Civil War was fought, was it to free the slaves, or was it to keep state laws?
Oh, state rights.
State rights.
Is what I keep hearing.
Yeah, but wasn't the state rights about keeping slaves? Or am I misunderstanding that?
The states' rights was the right to own slaves. Like, people love to play that semantics game, but it's a Southern thing, and I honestly, I'm not mad, because I understand when you're taught something and you are proud of something, you don't want to hear the negative things. It's like a child and his parent. As a child, you don't want to hear anything negative about your parents, because if your parent is a golden statue in your eyes, you don't want any smudges on that statue. Like, that's your parent. Like, they're awesome, no matter what. And for a lot of people, a lot of white people from the South, like, that's what it is. Like, even though the Civil War happened, and we really know the main reason was because Abraham Lincoln was talking about ending slavery. And so the Confederacy, they were like, we're not with it. And they love to say, oh, it's just states' rights and that. And it's like, no. Because if it was about states' rights, you could have fought that inside the legislature. You could have argued why. You could have done that. You could have done that battle inside the legislature. You left because if a law came down of freeing the slaves and allowing the enslaved people to be free and educated and have rights, like, you would have to follow through with that. And they just weren't with it. And even Abraham Lincoln, when it came down to it, he didn't really want to do it because he knew what was going to happen. He ended up doing it for a war tactic. And that's fact. Like, he did it for a war tactic.
So what I'm hearing is that black bodies have always been kind of used as commodity and as a tactic rather than as human. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Absolutely.
So you both like North and South in that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then the whole state's just caught up in that.
That is it.
Yeah, because don't forget, just because slaves were able to escape the South and move north doesn't mean that they had rights still.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it became a long battle after that still.
It still wasn't like we were human. Like, when everything was written, we were 3/4 of a human. We were 3/4 man. So it's like, come on, a lot of the American history we weren't included in when it comes to building this country, the laws and everything. We were only included to be subjugated. We were never included to be empowered.